This is the tutorial for setting up the Google Cardboard extension for GameMaker. I'll be starting with the Getting Started with 3D with GameMaker Studio 2 tutorial project that you can download from my website. It looks like this, very simple, very straightforward. And we'll basically be putting ourselves in this world so we can look around it. Now, the result of this will be a very, very simple project with no bells or whistles, just setting up the Google Cardboard stuff. Full documentation is available for this, and I actually have it on hand just in case I forget anything. So the first thing we need to do is configure our project to work with Google Cardboard on Android. And that's as simple as going to the game options and going to Android. First, we want to give it a convenient name so we can tell what we're actually looking at. And then we need to make sure we're using build settings with at least an API level of 16. This is required by Google Cardboard, and if this is actually lower, then I believe it automatically bumps it up during compile. You want to make sure you're building for an architecture that you're actually compatible with, and you want to make sure the orientation is locked to landscape. Now, it's possible it might work with flip landscape in future, and I believe you can change the locked orientation at runtime, but for this example, we'll just lock to landscape. Then we want to go to graphics, and we want to adjust color depth if we want stuff to look better, but we need to make sure that scaling is enabled to full scale so that we can use the full canvas of the display. And then we apply and we close it, and that's done. Now, if we run it on Android, we should be able to see the basic scene. And that should look like this. Basically the same thing as on the computer, but a bit squashed, and that's just because we're using the full scale now. The next thing we can do is now install the extension, and we do that by going to Tools and Import Local Package. You'll need to download it from the itch page, but I obviously have versions here. You want to make sure you're using the latest version, which has the most bug fixes. And then you can add everything, but you don't need terms included, but it is recommended to read them. And that's installation done, as far as that's concerned. Now we can move on to basic setup. To begin with, the first thing we can do is say that since we're now replacing the cameras entirely, we can remove the camera from this object entirely. And by extension, delete the update script. Now we can initialize Google Cardboard, and that is as simple as going cardboard init. Very simple, but it just sets up all the basic variables, and it will launch the QR code scanner, assuming the current app has never been configured for Google Cardboard before. Now we need to make sure that the Google Cardboard is bound to a view in every room. So we need to go to Room Start, and we need to do Cardboard Set Views. Now by default, this will bind itself to views 0 and 1, but you can specify which views to bind to. There's also Cardboard Set Target, I believe. Yep, which allows you to use it as if it's a surface, assuming you need more advanced rendering, but this is the easiest and most basic way. You also want to make sure your GUI scale is maximized to make sure that you're using the full area of the screen later. Lastly, all you need to do is add a Draw GUI event. You'll probably want to clear the buffer so that you don't have stuff floating around where your eyes want to see. And then use Cardboard Draw. And that basically handles all the cardboard drawing stuff. And it would technically work now, but there's some extra bits that need to be sorted. The main things that need sorting is orientation and world scale. Orientation simple enough because we just need to specify how in the world we're positioned and where up is, where forward is. And by default, I believe Google Cardboard assumes that Y is up and that Z is forwards. Now that doesn't necessarily work in our case in GameMaker. We could have our orientation in any given way. In this specific case, I want negative Z to be up and positive X to be forwards. But luckily, since coordinate spaces are completely made up, we can adjust this just using a matrix. So to simplify this, I made a function. So we use cardboard set space matrix. And there is some convenient macros in order to make sure that it's easier to remember. So we start with GMCB, which stands for GameMaker Cardboard, to make it easy to remember. And I want the room to be the floor. So there's this function that says the room is the floor. And now our orientation is correct. However, our scale is wrong. And here's how that gets funny. So in Google Cardboard, 1 unit is equal to 1 meter. However, in GameMaker, 1 pixel is equal to 1 unit. This basically means that 1 pixel is equal to 1 meter. And in this particular scene, each of these squares is 32 pixels, which would be 32 meters in cardboard space, which is a lot. Now I would prefer it if each of these squares was 1 meter, So we can define that in a very simple way. We say that our pixels per unit is equal to 32. And now we have a sort of basis that we can configure. You might want this to be in a global or in a macro or something, so you can configure it later. While we're here, I'm going to position myself in the world. So I need to cardboard head position, which positions about the center of your head in the world. So I'm going to put myself in the middle of the room. And I'm going to say that my eyes are probably about 175 centimeters off the ground, so 1.75 meters multiplied by pixels per unit. Now, because negative z is up in this particular configuration with GameMaker, I need to make sure that my height is put as negative. And now my head will be in the right place, but still the world will be very, very huge. So we need to make sure that the world is scaled down. Now, I cover this more in depth on the documentation page, but basically we can make use of setting the space matrix to scale the world at the same time without having to worry about any complicated stuff. Now, there is the slight problem that orientation vectors will need to be normalized if you do it via this method, but I explain that on the documentation page. So instead, we'll have our space matrix is equal to this, and then we'll set it as normal. Now what we want to do is we want to multiply it by a scale matrix. So we can put the scale matrix in either argument in here because it doesn't actually matter. Because the scaling is uniform, it'll have the same result whether it's applied before or after. So we'll do a matrix build. That's 0 translation, 0 rotation, and then 1 over our pixels per unit. Now, technically speaking, I think we're done. Our head is in the right place, our world scale is adjusted, and all the drawing stuff is set up. So let's hope, fingers crossed, we'll clear our cache just in case, make sure everything's stopped and cleared, and then we will run it. It will first ask me if I want to scan a thing. I can simply skip it purely because it will load the default profile and I don't need to worry about it. Now, we finally have it. Google Cardboard in GameMaker. Obviously, this is a very basic implementation, and you might want to do a lot more stuff, but there it is working. Obviously, I suggest you check out the more involved project for better examples of stuff because it includes lots of interesting stuff like gestures and interaction events. So yeah, so that just about covers that. Now you can have a basic setup, but more complicated stuff will obviously take more effort. But yeah, check the documentation, check out the more advanced project, and I'd love to see what you make. I should probably mention that if we make $1,000 gross on this, that's before fees, I'm going to open source the project, and that includes the C++ source, and it'll be free for everyone. So that's a cool goal to work towards. Okay, thanks, love you, bye.